Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts, lost traditional crafts, and things that quietly slip away from common memory. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in the gentle, fading world of forgotten artisanal techniques. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know, what is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode of Lost Traditional Crafts and Vanished Artistic Subtleties. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, drifting softly into the quiet villages of Indonesia and Southeast Asia around 1900, where the slow and delicate practice of ikat warp preparation unfolded like a whispered secret. These techniques, involving the careful tying and dye-resisting of individual warp threads before weaving, created mesmerizing patterns that depended on village-specific knowledge passed down through generations. Let us float gently onward, into the tactile rhythm of hands binding threads with plant fibers or cotton cords, forming precise resist points that shape the future fabric's design. But first, a slow little detour, for this extra interesting fact, that many of these regional ikat sequences, which required painstaking patience and an intimate knowledge of local plants for dye mordants, have nearly vanished under the soft weight of industrial textiles and synthetic dyes. Each warp thread, carefully prepared, was a tiny strand of history, a slow pulse in the creation of cloth that carried cultural stories woven invisibly into its very structure. We can then gently drift to the misty isles of Britain and Ireland around the same era, where the penny whistle, also called the tin whistle, carried simple yet distinct musical voices. These small flutes, often made from tin or other metals, were tuned regionally with fingering systems that differed from today's standardized instruments. Let us float gently onward, into a quiet corner where breath and finger meet metal, producing soft notes that rise and fall like the gentle sway of a quiet breeze through ancient woods. But first, a slow little detour, for this extra interesting fact, that these tunings, shaped by centuries of oral tradition and local custom, are now mostly forgotten, replaced by more uniform scales and modern instruments. The subtle differences in pitch and fingering created unique soundscapes that floated gently across cottages and festivals, each note a whisper of a vanished musical dialect, slowly fading into the hush of industrial standardization. Our drift now carries us across the Atlantic to the bustling theaters and vaudeville halls of early 20th century America in Europe, where playbills and posters were hand-lettered with elaborate ornamental scripts. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, admiring the soft curves and flourishing strokes of letters meticulously drawn by skilled hands, designed to capture attention while flowing like gentle rivers of ink. Let us float gently onward, past the quiet studios where artists shaped each word with brushes and pens, balancing readability and decoration in a slow dance of line and shadow. But first, a slow little detour, for this extra interesting fact, that these highly specialized display scripts, once essential for advertising performances, gradually disappeared as digital printing simplified lettering into uniform fonts. The delicate brushwork and human touch, once visible in every curve, now live only in faded posters and the slow memory of calligraphy enthusiasts. Turning now to the world of photography around 1910, glass negative collodion printing involved a slow, intricate finishing process using silver bath recipes. Let us float gently onward, to dimly lit darkrooms where photographic plates, coated in light-sensitive collodion, were slowly developed and washed with carefully prepared silver nitrate baths. But first, a slow little detour, For this extra interesting fact, that this wet plate process, demanding precise chemical balances and timing, was eventually replaced by more convenient gelatin silver methods, causing many of these recipes and their subtle effects to fade quietly from common practice. Each glass negative, a fragile window into the past, holds within it the ghostly imprint of moments caught between slow exposures and gentle chemical dances. Among native North American communities during this period, traditional peyote stitch beadwork motifs flourished, with specific regional patterns and loomless techniques used in ceremonial regalia. Let us float gently onward into quiet workshops where beads, tiny and colorful, are woven one by one in a slow, rhythmic stitch, forming symbols and narratives significant to each community's heritage. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that many of these local motif languages and unique stitch variants diminished after cultural suppression policies took hold, leaving gaps in the continuous passing of knowledge. The beadwork, tactile and vivid, was a slow hymn to identity and belonging, a quiet pulse woven softly into ceremonial garments, inviting us to drift through histories that are half-whispered and half-remembered. Around 1915 in the United States and Europe, tintype photographic finishing involved varnishing and backing formulations carefully applied to wet plate images. Let us float gently onward into the slow drying rooms where tintypes, metal plates coated with photographic emulsion, were sealed beneath delicate varnish layers to protect their images from fading and damage. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these varnishing recipes and backing methods were gradually replaced by gelatin silver processes, rendering many of these tactile chemical practices softly extinct. The tintypes themselves, often small and intimate, offer a quiet gaze into the past, each surface a softly shining relic of light and shadow preserved in the tender passage of time. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, gently slipping into the soft textures of Edwardian England around 1920, where the delicate art of Parian ware statuettes quietly flourished before its market faded away mid-century. These small porcelain figures, made from a biscuit porcelain known as Parian, were shaped with an unglazed, matte finish that felt almost like softly carved marble beneath one's fingertips. Let us float gently onward through the precise rasping techniques used to create subtle surface textures, capturing light and shadow in a way that lent these tiny sculptures a painterly softness. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that artisans would carefully apply translucent paint washes to accentuate details on these fragile figures, a practice rarely seen in other porcelain forms. The slow decline of this craft, brought on by changing tastes and industrial shifts, has left these quiet treasures like whispered memories on dusty shelves and in softly lit cabinets, their subtle beauty waiting to be rediscovered in moments of stillness. Drifting now through the smoky salons and intimate parlors of Europe in the same era, the atmosphere of cabaret and salon-style performances unfolds gently like a muted melody. These small-scale entertainments, filled with micro-spectacles and whispered jokes, were crafted for close audiences where each gesture and note could be appreciated with soft intensity. Let us float gently onward into rooms warmed by candlelight and quiet applause, where performers and listeners shared moments so personal they vanished with the rise of larger theaters and broadcast media. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that many of the intricate stylistic flourishes, soft vocal inflections, subtle pantomimes, and delicate musical interludes, have become almost impossible to recreate today, lost in the flood of mass entertainment. These performances, intimate and fragile as a moth's wing, remind us of a time when the art of closeness was itself a slow, tender craft. In the lush island landscapes of Bali around 1920, traditional Kelingking shadow puppet painting was practiced with regional pigments and carefully cured animal hides, forming the ethereal wayang kulit performances. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, gazing softly at the fine layering of natural pigments extracted from plants and minerals, mixed patiently and applied with care to hide surfaces stretched tight over wooden frames. Let us float gently onward through the rhythmic motions of hide curing, where each panel is prepared with secret village recipes, some now nearly forgotten. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these pigment and hide curing methods not only shaped the visual impact of the puppets but also influenced the way they moved and caught the light during storytelling, a delicate interplay of art and physics. These fading traditions leave behind a whispered legacy in the quiet villages that still honor their ancestors with the slow flicker of shadow and light. Our gentle drift carries us next to early 20th century Europe, where intricate automaton clock case figurines brought mechanical life to wooden clock housings with finely painted finishing. Let us float gently onward into the quiet workshops where skilled makers carved tiny wooden figures, assembling gears and levers with a patient precision that allowed the figures to move in rhythmic, hypnotic sequences alongside the clock's ticking heartbeat. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these automaton mechanisms often required bespoke painted decoration, with delicate brushstrokes layering color and detail onto the small wooden forms, creating scenes both mechanical and artistically expressive. As electronics began to replace mechanical clocks, this slow, handcrafted art of wooden automata dwindled, leaving only silent cases and still figures as echoes of a quieter, more deliberate time. Drifting across the Atlantic and back to early 20th century Europe and America, the rare technique of painting salon portraits with gouache on velvet offers a softly pigmented intimacy rarely found in other media. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, admiring the layered depths of gouache pigments gently applied to the plush, absorbent surface of velvet panels, creating portraits with a richness that seems to almost glow from within. Let us float gently onward through the slow buildup of translucent and opaque layers, where each brushstroke sinks softly into the fabric's weave, merging paint and cloth into a singular, tactile experience. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that this commercial niche, catering to those who desire deeply personal and velvety portraits, faded quietly as photographic portraits and other technologies took over, leaving these painted velvet works like a soft secret hidden in art history's folds. The gentle textures and deep hues remain, a whisper of tenderness caught in pigment and fiber. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly unraveling the quiet world of rag rug weaving across Europe and North America around 1930. These rugs, created on small looms using strips of worn fabric, were carefully bound and woven into patterns that whispered of household thrift and slow, practical artistry. Let us float gently onward through the tactile textures of recycled cloth, where each strip of cotton or wool was meticulously prepared and interlaced to form sturdy but humble floor coverings. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the specific rebinding techniques, methods used to secure frayed edges and extend the rug's life, varied subtly by region, often passed down quietly from mother to daughter. These delicate patterns and practical stitches faded softly with the rise of machine-made carpets, leaving behind a warm, homespun nostalgia captured in the faint echoes of weaving workshops long closed. The slow rhythm of hand-loomed rag rugs invites us to drift ever so gently into a world where every knot and thread mattered in the daily quiet of home life. Turning now to the slightly more technical but no less soothing craft of ceramic transfer printing, a process flourishing in Britain and Europe around the same time. Early transfer printing involved copperplate rollers applying delicate inked designs onto ceramic surfaces, a method requiring inks formulated from special pigment blends quite different from those used today. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, admiring the precision of these copperplate rollers, each etched with fine lines, turning slowly as they imprinted intricate motifs onto wet ceramics. Let us float gently onward through the chemistry of early inks, where mineral pigments, oil carriers, and glaze compatibility were carefully balanced by artisans who knew that a slight variation could mean a blur or a smudge. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of the original ink recipes, involving now obsolete mineral sources and organic binders, have been lost or replaced by synthetic formulas, making the faithful recreation of vintage transfer prints a quiet challenge for today's ceramic historians and craftspeople. The soft, repetitive hum of rollers and the scent of kiln firings linger faintly in the memory of these long-past studios. Drifting gently now into the warm, sun-soaked atmosphere of 1935 Cuba, where traditional trova singing thrived in intimate circles. This three-part singing style, known for its improvisational spirit and subtle variations from town to town, wove musical stories that flowed gently like a river song. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, listening softly to the intricate interweaving of voices, each adding their own quiet twist to the familiar patterns. Let us float gently onward into the relaxed rhythms and gentle call and response of trova ensembles, where micro-variants, the little local embellishments and unique phrasing, carried the identity of entire villages. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of these micro-variants faded under the steady wave of mass media and radio broadcasts, which favored standardized versions of folk music, gently smoothing out regional rough edges. The hushed echoes of trova remind us of a time when song was a personal conversation between neighbors, a slow and soft exchange filled with cultural whispers and shared histories. Carrying us softly into the 1940s across Europe and the USA, we find ourselves surrounded by the delicate veneer inlays of handcrafted marquetry panels adorning radio cabinets. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, marveling quietly at the delicate placement of thin wood veneers, cut and layered into intricate geometric or floral patterns, each piece selected for grain and tone to create subtle visual poetry. Let us float gently onward through the workshops filled with the scent of polished wood and glue, where artisans worked patiently to make radio casings into objects of soft beauty. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the demand for such artisan paneling waned as plastic mass production took over radio manufacturing, causing many skilled veneer workers to shift away from their craft, leaving behind only the faintest traces of their patient artistry. The smooth surfaces and layered grains seem to hum a quiet melody of dedication and stillness, a soft imprint on the history of everyday objects. Floating now through rural landscapes worldwide during the 1940s, work songs once echoed across fields and factories, carrying specific call and response rhetorical devices designed to coordinate group labor and build community rhythm. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, immersed in the slow cadence of these songs, where each call would be met by a measured, complementary response, weaving voices together like threads in a tapestry. Let us float gently onward into the delicate formulas that shaped these exchanges, repetitive phrases and melodic contours tuned carefully to the work at hand. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that the shift to industrialized work patterns and mechanized labor greatly reduced the contexts in which such songs were performed, causing many local variants to disappear quietly, like soft echoes fading in a vast hall. The subtle call and response remains a tender memory, a slow rhythm that once moved hands and hearts together in harmonious labor. In the realm of animation studios around 1945, hand-painted cells were crafted with careful layering of inks and paints onto transparent sheets, forming the visual frames of many beloved films. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, drifting slowly through the quiet assembly lines where artists used fine brushes to trace lines and fill colors with patient precision, each cell a small, translucent canvas. Let us float gently onward Through the drying racks and drying times, where layers were applied in a specific order to prevent smudging and ensure clarity, a delicate choreography of timing and technique. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these traditional cell painting methods were almost entirely replaced by digital animation in later decades, leaving the original hand inking and painting processes as tender ghosts of craftsmanship. The soft glow of light passing through these painted sheets holds a quiet magic, a lullaby of pigments and patience caught forever in motion. Wandering gently into the Arctic regions where traditional Inuit caribou sinew embroidery was practiced on clothing, the stitches formed distinct patterns whose specialized techniques offered both function and gentle beauty. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, tracing the slow, looping motions of sinew threading through soft animal hides, a tactile dance that combined durability with quiet decoration. Let us float gently onward into the varied stitches that differ subtly by region, each reflecting practical knowledge honed over generations. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that many of these stitching methods waned under the influence of mass-produced garments, softening the connection between maker and material. The gentle loops and bindings remain a tender stitch in the vast fabric of human creativity, a slow, soft whisper stitched into the cold northern air. Here we are, softly stepping into the quiet world of Basque Pyrenean folk berzos, a form of a cappella improvisational sung poetry rooted deeply in local traditions around the 1950s. Let us float gently onward through the intricate folds of dialectal formulas and melodic cadences, where each performer weaves words spontaneously within a carefully structured rhythmic and rhyming framework. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that some regional dialects and unique formulaic expressions within berzos are now considered endangered, as the intimate art of live poetic improvisation quietly yields to modern entertainment forms. The slow and deliberate birth of each verse, shaped by generations of oral transmission, feels like a gentle breath held just long enough to release a soft sigh of language's subtle power. The voices rise and fall in a delicate dance, not hurried, not sharp, but lovingly composed in the moment, allowing the listener to drift ever so slowly into the serene flow of words and melody, a soothing murmur from the heart of the Pyrenees. Shifting now to the angular world of Czech cubist furniture joinery idioms from around 1950, where the geometric forms of cubism found a curious and highly unusual expression in the craft of joinery and finishing. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, immersed in the soft shadows cast by sharp, angular lines carved into wood, where joiners devised novel techniques to assemble and finish pieces that challenged traditional curves and surfaces. Let us float gently onward through the intricacies of carpentry where edges meet in unexpected intersections, and finishing touches reflect a rare blend of artistry and engineering, a style with very few surviving makers today. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the limited survival of these joinery methods owes partly to the challenging nature of working with such fragmented forms, which demanded precision and patience, soft qualities that are increasingly rare in fast-moving furniture production. These pieces, with their fractured yet harmonious structures, seem to whisper softly of a past where form and function were both gently reimagined, inviting quiet contemplation as if nestled beneath mossy boughs. Turning ever so slowly to the delicate art of hand-engraved watch dial scripts and Gillicky engine turning recipes around 1955 in Switzerland and Europe, where tiny, rhythmic patterns were etched and turned by skilled hands into the faces of timekeepers. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, tracing the soft, repetitive spirals and waves cut into metal surfaces, each line placed with almost meditative care using the Gillicky technique, a complex method involving engine turning lathes and precise hand-guided tools. Let us float gently onward through the intricate scripts carefully engraved by artisans, whose delicate strokes formed not only numerals and letters but also subtle decorative flourishes that whispered of elegance and patience. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that many of these hand engraving and engine turning methods have been largely displaced by machine finishes and automated production, leaving the human touch as a soft memory, a tender echo within the cold metal of contemporary watchmaking. The softly turning gears inside a watch seem to echo the slow rhythm of the engraving process itself, a lullaby of precision and quiet repetition. Gliding now to the maritime cultures of the 1960s and the fading traditions of Victorian-era folk tattoo motifs, especially among sailors who carried these designs as talismans and stories inked with specific pigment recipes. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, navigating the slow currents of tattoo traditions where the ink mixed from soot, minerals, and organic compounds told silent stories etched in flesh, passed quietly from sailor to sailor. Let us float gently onward through the slow evolution of these motifs, where anchor shapes, ships, and other symbols became markers of identity and memory, now softened and reshaped by modern tattoo studio norms and sterilization standards. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that some of the original pigment recipes and hand-poking techniques, once unique to small maritime communities, have quietly disappeared as electric tattoo machines and standardized inks took hold. The muted colors and patient dotting speak of slow, deliberate rituals, a kind of storytelling whispered through the tip of a needle, where time seemed to pass softly with each gentle poke. We now drift into the softly glowing kilns of Portugal in the 1960s, where traditional firing and glazing methods for azulejos tiles employed local temperature sequences and tin-based glaze recipes. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, surrounded by the slow, patient dance of heat and chemistry, as artisans carefully monitored kiln atmospheres to achieve the perfect opaque white and vibrant blues characteristic of azulejos. Let us float gently onward into the quiet science of firing cycles, where temperatures rose and fell in controlled rhythms to develop the glaze's unique texture and sheen. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that industrial glazing methods later replaced many traditional recipes, subtly changing the colors and surface qualities of tiles, while softening the relationship between artisan and material. The gentle crackling and cooling of ceramic tiles seems to hum a lullaby of transformation and care, the slow unfolding of color beneath a faint veil of smoke and steam. Weaving ourselves into the early experiments of electronic tape music splicing and musique concrete editing around 1965 in France and Europe, where composers carefully cut and looped magnetic tapes to create sound collages. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, drifting through the tactile sensation of slicing tape with tiny razors, splicing pieces together with adhesive tape, and looping sounds into slow, repetitive patterns. Let us float gently onward into the patience and precision required by these early pioneers who treated tape itself as a malleable instrument, carefully layering sound fragments to build textured compositions. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that most of these analog techniques were later superseded by digital audio workstations, leaving behind the soft hum of tape reels and the tender click of splicing tools as quiet reminders of a slower creative process. The gentle, looping sounds echo softly, a slow river of auditory memory flowing gently past our ears, softly unfolding the delicate world of regional handloom ikat motifs from the small islands of the Pacific around the 1970s. Let us float gently onward into the intricate weaving of local patterns, where each village held its own secret dye recipes and binding methods, crafting ikat cloth that carried stories in their faded threads. The migration of islanders and the gentle rush of tourism slowly unraveled these fragile traditions, leaving some motifs whispered only in memory. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, That ikat dyeing involves a patient process of resist tying and dye bathing the warp threads before weaving, demanding a precise balance of tension and color layering. The slow rhythm of handloom weaving, combined with the fading chemical knowledge of natural dyes, feels like moss growing softly over forgotten tools, a quiet reminder of craftsmanship tethered gently to place and time. Each blurred-edged pattern holds a whisper of history, a soft vibration echoing beneath the vibrant hues now dulled by time's steady breath. Drifting softly into the world of Soviet-era propaganda lithographs from the 1970s, we find ourselves surrounded by workshop-specific hand-applied color finishing techniques used to breathe life into state prints. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, quietly tracing the gentle brush strokes and layered color washes applied after the black and white lithographic plates had done their work. Let us float gently onward through the systematic yet handcrafted processes where skilled workers added reds, blues, and yellows to convey messages of unity and progress, each print imbued with the human touch that is now a historical artifact. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that different workshops had unique finishing methods, from stippling to glazing, creating subtle variations even among standardized images. The softly fading colors remind us of a quieter era when art and ideology gently wove together like slowly turning gears, quietly spinning the fabric of society. We now slowly turn to the traditional Welsh love spoon carving motifs, those tender courting tokens of the 1970s with their specific symbolic cuts and patterns. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, caressing the smooth wood with its interlocking hearts, knots, and wheels, each cut made with patient intention, whispering meanings once broad but now narrowed through time's passage. Let us float gently onward, past the hands of carvers who crafted these spoons as soft declarations of affection, each motif a coded message of love, fidelity, and protection. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that some motifs evolved locally, becoming unique to particular valleys or families, yet many of their meanings have quietly faded or simplified in modern interpretations. The gentle scraping and sanding evoke the slow unfolding of stories spoken not aloud, but through wood grain and shape, inviting the listener to drift alongside the soft murmur of tradition. Gliding gently now into the analog world of 1980s VHS tape art and tape head noise sculpting, where early video artists manipulated tracking errors and tape distortions to craft unique visual textures. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, floating through the hissing static and wavering lines that emerge when tape heads falter or magnetic particles shift in subtle dances. Let us float gently onward into the slow, tactile practice of coaxing art from the imperfections of obsolete media, where the analog glitch becomes a soft, unpredictable rhythm. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these manual manipulations are less accessible now with digital video's smooth surfaces, leaving these tactile, noise-borne textures like delicate moss growing over a forgotten reel. The gentle flicker and hum of VHS artifacts offer a lullaby of imperfection, a slow sigh of entropy and memory. We now drift to the quieter hum of hand-tuned radio broadcast jingles in the 1980s, small station Foley workflows where jingles were created live and layered with ambient sounds. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, gently listening to the precise footsteps, swishes, and subtle instrumental touches crafted by sound artists in cozy studios, blending each element by hand before digital sample libraries took over. Let us float gently onward into the quiet reverberations of analog mixing desks and softly tapped cymbals, a slow, attentive dance of sound woven together piece by piece. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that each local station often developed its own signature jingles, making every broadcast a quietly unique experience lost in the rush of digital standardization. The soft crackle of old radio waves invites the mind to drift, a gentle ripple in a compound of sound. Turning slowly now to European punch-cut steel stencil lettering from the mid-1980s, a craft that once shaped signage with precise hand-punched steel letters before vinyl cutting machines took over. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Softly feeling the subtle impressions left by tiny punches on thin steel sheets, each letter carefully crafted with patience and exactitude. Let us float gently onward through the rhythmic tapping that created stencils, which in turn formed the foundations of signs, posters, and displays in a pre-digital age. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the tactile resistance of steel and the unique sound of hammer against metal were as much part of the craft as the finished lettering itself. The faint echo of hammer taps lingers in the mind like a slow heartbeat, steady and unhurried, whispering of a time when letters were born from quiet perseverance. Softly now we enter the traditional basket wrapping boat matting techniques of Southeast Asia and the Pacific, practiced into the 1980s with plant fibers used to waterproof and insulate hulls of small boats. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Enveloped in the texture of woven mats, the scent of natural fibers, and the rhythmic hand motions of artisans entwining strips of rattan, bamboo, or palm leaves with deliberate care. Let us float gently onward through the subtle differences of wrapping patterns designed to repel water and add resilience, a craft quietly replaced by modern synthetic materials but still alive in memory. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the choice of plant fiber and the tightness of wrapping greatly influenced the longevity and buoyancy of these boats, a soft science perfected through generations. The gentle rustling of woven mats invites the mind to drift on a slow current, where craftsmanship and nature intertwine like slowly turning gears beneath a mossy forest floor. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Gently unfolding the quietly fading art of Aztec revival featherwork from the 1990s in Mexico, where artisans attempted to piece together ancient motifs from delicate fragments and colonial-era descriptions. Let us float gently onward into the soft shimmer of iridescent feathers, carefully assembled in intricate patterns that once held ritual significance but now survive as partial echoes of a past softly spoken through time. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that the revival process often involved painstaking study of museum specimens, colonial paintings, and ethno-historical texts, yet some assembly techniques and symbolic layouts remain only faintly understood. The tactile layering of feathers, beeswax adhesives, and plant resins once formed ritual panels that glowed with quiet life, and although some motifs are lost or simplified, the slow, patient hand of revival artists attempts to trace those luminous whispers, like feathers floating gently downward in a dappled forest glade. Drifting softly now into the world of early 1990s hand-assembled CD-ROM multimedia authoring aesthetics, a chapter in the digital arts where designers created interactive visual and navigation systems for a now obsolete medium. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Navigating pixelated menus, pixel grids, and skeuomorphic buttons softly glowing on early computer screens. Let us float gently onward through the slow layering of images, text blocks, and animations composed with software like Macromedia Director, whose interface art was often handcrafted with patient care, using limited palettes and careful layout design. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact, that these early CD-ROM projects often had very specific graphical idioms, like beveled edges and drop shadows, born from the software limitations and hardware display characteristics of the era. The soft click of a mouse, the gentle fade of a transition, these design choices now feel like slow currents beneath the glossy veneer of modern smooth interfaces, a whispered lullaby from a digital dawn long past. We now gently drift into the mid-1990s shockwave and flash era web animation motion grammar, where vector-based animations and navigation idioms brought a playful, if sometimes jittery, life to early internet pages. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Watching simple shapes morph, buttons pulse, and page elements bounce with a rhythm bound by limited frame rates and small file sizes. Let us float gently onward into a world where the distinct visual language of flash animations, complete with looping motions, easing curves, and drag-and-drop interactivity, became a defining but now fading era of web expression. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many stylistic conventions, like bouncing logos and oversized click here prompts, were born not from aesthetics alone but also from technical necessity and user interface experimentation. The slow unfolding of frames and vector morphs reminds one of slowly turning gears beneath the surface of a moss-covered machine, a rhythm lost beneath the polished minimalism of modern web design. Now, let us float gently onward into the early urban graffiti letterform techniques of 1995 New York City subway culture, where aerosol artists honed their spray cap selections and letter structures with a patient eye for style and flow. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, tracing the soft curves and sharp angles of old-school subway tags and throw-ups, each letter crafted with an understanding of aerosol paint pressure, nozzle types, and surface texture. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that early graffiti writers often developed personal coding for letter connections and fills, making each tag a signature slow dance of color and form. These techniques, once vital to expressing identity in the underground, softened with commercialization and mainstream adoption, yet their echoes linger like a gentle breeze rustling moss on forgotten walls. Softly now we glide into the realm of 1998 photocopy zine workflows, where independent scenes embraced the Xerox aesthetic through analog photocopy collage and toner manipulation. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Enveloped in the grainy textures of halftone dots, the soft contrast of black and white images layered with care and intention. Let us float gently onward through the tactile world of scissors, glue sticks, and folded paper, where the photocopier's mechanical hum was as much part of the creative process as the images themselves. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many artists intentionally pushed their photocopiers to create ghosted shadows, smeared edges, and high contrast effects, imbuing their works with a gentle imperfection now rare in pristine digital printing. The slow reproduction of these analog zines invites the mind to drift, like feathers settling quietly on a forest floor. Finally, though without ending our journey, let us float gently into the world of hand-painted arcade cabinet marquee lettering and airbrush gradients around the year 2000. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly admiring the hand-cut vinyl layouts and delicate airbrush fades that once crowned arcade machines with vibrant, custom-designed faces. Let us float gently onward through the layers of paint and masking tape, where each gradient was coaxed slowly from opaque to transparent with steady, practiced hands. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these airbrush gradients required careful control of compressor pressure, nozzle shape, and paint viscosity to avoid overspray or blotching, a slow art now mostly replaced by digital print. The faint aroma of lacquer and the soft sweep of a brush evoke a quiet workshop, where craftsmanship whispered beneath spinning arcade reels. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly exploring the delicate, tactile world of analog modular synth patch panel aesthetics around the year 2000, a time when electronic musicians lovingly twisted knobs and patched cables with vintage modules that held quirks no longer found in modern gear. Let us float gently onward into a landscape of glowing LEDs and tactile switches, where the hands-on practice of patching cables between inputs and outputs formed a language of sound sculpting almost like a whispered conversation between musician and machine. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that many modules possessed idiosyncrasies, unique quirks in voltage response or filter resonance, that musicians memorized as part of their personal toolkit, knowledge now slowly fading as digital emulations and compact synths take over. The slow weaving of patch chords, each creating a bridge for audio or control voltage signals, evokes the gentle turning of gears, a mechanical poetry lost in the streamlined age of presets and touchscreens, a soft ritual practiced in dimly lit rooms where sound drifted like feathers settling through quiet air. Now, drifting ever so slowly into the realm of analog film subtitling, let us immerse ourselves in the meticulous mechanical and optical techniques of the early 2000s. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, gazing at the delicate dance of perforator machines stamping subtitles directly onto film strips and optical tiling units painting white text onto celluloid frames with precision light exposure. Let us float gently onward, where each subtitle was born of mechanical exactness and optical chemistry, with timing governed by sprocketed frames moving steadily through machines. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these subtitling practices required film editors to master the interplay of physical film stock and light sources, a tactile process replaced almost entirely by digital workflows, yet still cherished by some archivists and film restorers who cherish the slow hum of vintage subtitling machines. The subtle flicker of light passing through the film gate, the faint clatter of perforators, all form a slow symphony of analog cinema craft, a whisper lost in the glow of pixel screens. Let us float gently onward into the quaint digital gardens of the early 2000s GeoCities web aesthetic, where personal web pages blossomed with DIY spirit and idiosyncratic HTML table hacks. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, wandering through pixelated backgrounds, tiled GIFs, and clunky navigation bars built with painstaking manual code that defined a very specific, ephemeral web style. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that many designers used nested tables not for elegance but as a workaround for limited browser support, a patchwork of cells and rows creating pixel-perfect layouts in a time before CSS was widespread. The soft, repetitive patterns of backgrounds and the blinking text marquees recall the gentle rhythm of a slowly turning gear wheel, the flickering glow of CRT monitors bathing quiet rooms where early web architects dreamed in pixel grids and source code, crafting worlds both simple and cluttered in equal measure. Now we drift lightly into the realm of hand-stitched game cartridge label printing, a niche craft cherished by retro gaming collectors around the early 2000s. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly considering the tiny, meticulous methods of replacement label production involving silkscreen printing and varnishing, designed to mimic the original cartridge aesthetics as closely as possible. Let us float gently onward through layers of ink and transparent sealants, where each printed label became a tender restoration of lost or damaged game cartridges, an act of slow devotion to preserving pixelated memories. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that collectors often had to learn subtle differences in label paper textures, adhesive types, and varnish finishes to achieve authentic feeling replicas, knowledge passed gently between small communities. The quiet rustle of paper, the faint scent of ink and varnish, all whisper in a dim room lit by computer screens and nostalgia, a slow dance of craftsmanship preserving fragile, beloved relics. Softly now we settle into the quiet world of analog photocopier distortion art, where artists in the early 2000s coaxed machines to produce textured, warped prints through copier warm-up quirks and double exposures. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, enveloped in the grainy, unpredictable patterns born from analog machine hum and mechanical idiosyncrasies. Let us float gently onward. Across rippling shadows, softened lines, and ghostly overlays layered atop photocopied pages, creating a tactile collage language now flattened by the pristine perfection of digital printing. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that some artists deliberately ran paper multiple times through warm machines to invite unpredictable distortions, patiently waiting as rollers and light exposure danced together in imperfect harmony. The soft clatter and whir of a photocopier in the quiet room echoes like a slow heartbeat, each imperfect copy a whisper of analog texture preserved in paper fibers. Without ending our gentle journey, we drift into the world of obsolete mobile ringtone composition idioms, rooted in the monophonic tracker phone era of the mid-2000s. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly exploring the constrained yet creative practices of composing melodies within the tight limits of carrier-specific synthesis channels and monophonic sound chips. Let us float gently onward, through a landscape of beeps and blips shaped by tracker-like sequencing software that relied on exact knowledge of phone hardware quirks and synthesis capabilities. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that ringtone composers had to carefully tailor their compositions to avoid hardware limitations such as channel stealing and limited polyphony, balancing simplicity with catchiness in a way now mostly forgotten. The faint beep of a ringtone, the rhythmic pattern of tones arranged with deliberate care, evoke a slow, mechanical lullaby played softly on early mobile devices. Here we are, softly drifting into the world of early Facebook and MySpace profile page graphic composition aesthetics around 2007, a peculiar digital garden where personal identity bloomed through layered GIFs, counters, and animated badges. Let us float gently onward into this pixelated realm, where each profile was a carefully crafted tapestry of blinking icons, tiled backgrounds, and marquees, a slow collage of self-expression constrained by early web design tools and bandwidth limitations. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the precise layering of translucent GIFs demanded patience and trial, as each element interacted with others, creating subtle flickers and shimmering edges reminiscent of fireflies caught in slow motion. These visual choices whispered in rhythm with dial-up tones and slow internet connections, a nostalgic dance of pixels glowing softly on small CRT monitors. The careful balance between too many animations and visual coherence was a quiet art, practiced by millions who crafted their digital selves with infinite care, yet all within the constraints of pre-mobile web browsers and often unstable layouts. It was a time when a simple page counter marked your visitors like a slow heartbeat, and glittery text scrolled endlessly, inviting others to linger in these softly glowing virtual spaces. Let us float gently onward into the quieter world of compact disc duplication, shrink-wrap, hand finishing within indie music scenes of the late 2000s. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, appreciating the tender rituals of small-run CD production, where musicians and artisans meticulously assembled jewel cases, hand-sewn inserts, and shrink-wrap seals with care, now largely replaced by the intangible streaming age. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the tactile process of folding printed liners and stapling booklets into sleeves formed a quiet choreography, a dance of paper and plastic performed in dim rooms lit by soft lamps, often accompanied by the faint crinkle of cellophane wrapping. Each package bore subtle fingerprints and tiny imperfections, lending a sense of intimacy and uniqueness to these physical objects, so different from the infinite and weightless streams of data floating in the cloud. The scent of fresh ink, the faint rustle of coated paper, and the gentle snap of a jewel case closing, these small sensory moments linger like whispers from a bygone era, a reminder that music was once encased in lovingly crafted containers, not just digital files. Now, let us drift gently onward into the curious, mechanical realm of handcrafted e-paper prototype display assemblies around 2009. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Softly observing early maker scene experiments where electromechanical toggles, adhesives, and fragile components came together to create rudimentary e-paper interfaces. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these early prototypes often relied on delicate assemblies of tiny mechanical switches and thin film components, a slow symphony of tactile and visual interplay before the sleek, refined e-ink modules we know today became standard. The slow clack of toggles and faint hum of wiring echoed in workshops filled with quiet concentration, where inventors patiently iterated on fragile models, seeking just the right balance between readability, refresh speed, and mechanical resilience. These early e-paper interfaces, fragile as floating feathers in a gentle breeze, laid the groundwork for modern low-power displays, yet their painstaking assembly and patchwork construction remain largely lost to time and mass production. It is a soft, forgotten whisper in the evolution of display technology. Let us float gently onward into the world of net art's lower bandwidth shock aesthetics, recalling the early 2010s and the nostalgic constraints of dial-up internet. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Immersed in deliberate design choices that embraced pixelation, glitch artifacts, and slow-loading images as aesthetic features rather than bugs. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that many artists intentionally mimicked the jerky, stuttering loading sequences of early internet connections to evoke a sense of longing and technological nostalgia, their work unfolding like slow-moving shadows on moss-covered stones. The visual texture of fragmented images, color banding, and jerky animations became a poetic embrace of technological limitations, transforming frustration into a tender digital sigh. These artworks whispered of the patience once required to connect and explore, now nearly lost in an age of instant, high-speed streams. The rhythmic, slow reveal of pixelated forms gently invites the viewer to settle into a pace much slower than modern media allows, encouraging a kind of soft contemplation and digital meditation. Now, drifting softly, let us consider the ephemeral world of physical Twitter timeline performances around 2011, where live-printed social media feeds became tangible, fleeting installations. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Captivated by the slow hum of printers churning out tweets in real time, transforming ephemeral digital chatter into physical strips of paper, fragile as dried leaves on a quiet forest floor. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these performances relied on hardware, thermal printers, dot matrix machines, that now lie largely unused, their soft whirs and clicks a distant echo of analog machinery meeting digital flux. The printed timelines created slow, tangible records of fast-moving social streams, moments captured and laid gently upon tables or scattered like feathers in a gentle breeze, offering viewers a chance to reflect on the relentless pace of information by grounding it in tactile form. The ephemeral quality of this art form mirrored the transitory nature of tweets themselves, a soft reminder of impermanence amid the constant flow. Let us float gently onward into the delicate, fading aesthetics of fax art collaborative transmission practices, which thrived in the early 2010s. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Softly tracing the scratchy, grainy textures and transmission errors that artists embraced as part of their visual language, turning fax degradation into a medium of poetic imperfection. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that each fax transmission added subtle noise, streaks, and glitches, like ripples on a still pond, which artists welcomed as collaborators rather than nuisances, embedding chance and entropy into their creative process. These analog distortions, born of phone lines and thermal paper, are shadows of a pre-digital world now overshadowed by email and instant messaging, yet they carry a tactile warmth and unpredictability absent from pristine digital copies. The slow drip of data across copper wires, the faint hiss of machines, and the gradual reveal of images create a hushed ritual, a quiet echo of connection in a fast, noisy world. Gently drifting into the delicate craft of hand-drawn stop-motion paper puppet single-frame rotoscopy around 2013. A slow, loving practice nestled within indie animation circles, this technique involved the painstaking creation of hand-inked frames layered upon paper puppets, moved ever so slightly between shots to conjure motion. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these workflows required a quiet patience, as artists traced and retraced individual frames with pens and brushes, watching the subtle shifts in limbs and expressions like watching leaves tremble in a slow, soft breeze. The paper puppets themselves often bore the faintest creases and smudges, tender imperfections that whispered the human hand behind each image. This method, born from a desire to combine the tactile with the animated, contrasts with today's digital ease and rapid timeline adjustments. Its charm lies in the very slowness, the deliberate, frame-by-frame crafting that invites one to pause and breathe deeply in the quiet space between each movement. Let us float gently onward into the analog VJ slide to tape cutting and optical adapter aesthetics of the mid-2010s club VJ culture. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly observing the layered magic of analog slide stacking and tape projection techniques that once wove together live visuals and darkened rooms pulsating with sound. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that VJs would manually manipulate slide carousels and splice tape loops, coaxing shimmering colors and shifting forms through physical adapters and carefully timed transitions, crafting an ephemeral dance of light and shadow. These analog tools required steady hands and practiced rhythms, each flick and click echoing softly beneath pounding beats. As digital software later took over, these analog methods fell into quiet obscurity, their warm, unpredictable glitches replaced by polished precision. The grainy textures and gentle flickers of light once felt like watching fireflies drift through a misty forest, slow and unpredictable, always unique. Now, let us drift gently into the maker scene ritual surrounding vinyl cutting hardware calibration around 2015. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, tracing the quiet ceremony of manual cutter head adjustments that birthed distinctive artifacts in vinyl stickers and decals. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that the fine-tuning of blade depth, pressure, and speed was a tactile negotiation between machine and human intuition, with each artisan developing their own signature quirks, subtle marks that whispered of their presence in the final product. This calibration was not simply technical but almost meditative, requiring stillness and attentiveness as tiny adjustments transformed raw materials into clean cuts or delicate tears. The advent of auto-calibrating machines smoothed away these imperfections, replacing unique craft signatures with uniformity and speed, leaving behind a lost dance of slow machine-human harmony, much like the gentle creak of old gears slowly turning under careful hands. Let us float gently onward into the quiet world of SMS-based interactive fiction from the pre-smartphone era, blossoming around 2015 in mobile interactive art circles. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, in a realm where narratives unfolded through text messages constrained by character limits and linear branching structures, inviting readers to choose paths through carefully coded short replies. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that crafting these narratives demanded an intimate understanding of mobile carrier constraints, message timing, and the unpredictable delays of cellular networks, all of which shaped the storytelling experience itself. Authors composed stories in brief fragments, mindful of pacing and reader patience, weaving worlds through sequences of terse questions and answers, a literary dance slowed by technological limitation. As smartphones and web apps now effortlessly deliver multimedia-rich experiences, this quiet art of SMS storytelling, with its poetic minimalism and technical constraints, drifts gently into the past like a faint echo carried on a slow breeze. Now, drifting softly into the early 3D rendering wireframe aesthetic pipelines of the mid-2010s CG communities, we find ourselves surrounded by the ghostly skeletons of polygonal forms and shimmering grids. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly admiring the quirks of early 3D packages and rendering settings that crafted unique wireframe looks, ethereal and geometric like slowly turning constellations against a velvety sky. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these pipelines depended heavily on specific software versions and hardware quirks, making certain looks nearly impossible to replicate perfectly today. Artists embraced these limitations, coaxing out shimmering edges and translucent meshes that felt like watching a gentle rain of light upon an unseen framework. The slow layering of nodes and textures, the precise tweaking of shading parameters, all contributed to a quiet visual poetry that invited viewers to float within the digital scaffolding itself, a slow exploration of form and space before photorealism took hold. Let us float gently onward into the artisan world of hand-stitched phone case leather weaving from around 2017. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, softly contemplating the small-scale braiding patterns crafted specifically for early smartphone models, whose dimensions now feel quaint and obsolete. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these tiny leather stitches and braids demanded a delicate touch, the gentle pull of waxed thread through supple hides, crafting protective yet decorative cases that fit like a slow embrace. These patterns, often repeated in artisan workshops, carried whispers of regional styles and traditional leathercraft techniques adapted to a modern canvas. The tactile feel of leather and thread, the subtle scent of oils and dyes, and the slow rhythm of stitching all combined into a mindful process now largely replaced by molded plastic and mass-produced synthetic covers. This craft is a soft reminder of the gentle, human-paced rhythms once interwoven with the technologies we carry close to our bodies. Drifting softly into the quiet world of early augmented reality marker aesthetics around 2018. These printed are markers, often simple black and white squares patterned with high-contrast fiducials, served as visual anchors for the nascent our experiences, guiding devices to overlay digital objects precisely onto physical surfaces. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these markers were often adorned with subtle graphic flourishes, designed not only for technical detection but also to fit modest aesthetic frameworks within apps and games. As technology gently advanced, markerless art detection, relying on surface mapping and object recognition, softly replaced these early conventions, leaving behind a trail of printed squares quietly collecting dust. These early markers, once the gentle heartbeat of augmented reality's visual language, now feel like watching an old film reel flicker beneath a canopy of moss, fragile and slowly fading into the whispering quiet of technological progress. Let us float gently onward into the intimate rituals of disposable camera community darkroom printing from around 2019. A subtle, analog niche, these low-cost cameras offered a fleeting, tactile connection to photography, inviting users to capture moments with a soft grain and limited exposures. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that devoted communities gathered in shared darkrooms, orchestrating chemical baths and delicate timing to coax images slowly from blank sheets of paper. These communal print rituals involved mixing developer, stop, and fixer chemicals with patient hands, watching the ghostly outlines emerge under dim red lights, a slow magic far removed from instant digital gratification. As easy photo uploads blossomed online, these quiet analog practices gently receded, their scent of fixer and softly rippling water lingering like a fading breeze across a quiet forest floor. Now, Let us drift into the dreamy micro-genre vaporwave visual collage conventions from 2019, floating within certain internet subcultures. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are. Softly enveloped in pastel hues, glitch fragments, and retro computer iconography collaged into hazy, nostalgic compositions. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these vaporwave idioms often borrowed from early net aesthetics, weaving distorted Windows interfaces and VHS tape artifacts into a patchwork tapestry evoking digital melancholy. Over time, some of these specific visual languages have become niche, quietly tucked away like forgotten postcards in a mossy glade, their faded colors and warped edges gently whispering tales of early internet dreams now slipping softly from collective memory. Let us float gently onward into the ephemeral COVID-era video call performance theatrics from 2020, a softly transient form born of global necessity. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, observing the tender dance of latency glitches, frozen frames, and accidental gestures that performers and participants embraced as part of their shared experience. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these time-bound digital performances leaned heavily on the quirks of software and bandwidth, turning stutters and pixelation into intentional aesthetic tools. As physical gatherings gently resumed, these video call-specific theatrics quietly dissolved, leaving behind echoes like feathers floating gently down to rest on a calm forest floor. Now, drifting slowly into the underground realm of DIY circuit-bending instrument conventions from 2020, where makers explored hardware hacks on obsolete toys and controllers. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, gently unraveling the tactile exploration of opening small devices, rerouting circuits with alligator clips, and coaxing unexpected sounds from forgotten electronics. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these early microforms depended heavily on now vanishing components, making certain hacks impossible as specific chips and parts quietly slipped out of production. The tactile, unpredictable nature of circuit bending offered a softly crackling symphony of chance and creativity, a delicate art form that now drifts like slowly turning gears beneath layers of new technology. Let us float gently onward into the brief bloom of NFT-specific visual composition templates from early marketplaces around 2021. No one asked for this. And yet, here we are, immersed in design idioms shaped by digital collectors and artists, where token presentation templates conveyed rarity and prestige through carefully arranged borders and iconography. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these visual languages evolved swiftly with market shifts, leaving many early templates abandoned and softly forgotten, like the quiet rustle of leaves slipping away under the slow passage of seasons. These templates captured a brief moment in the unfolding story of digital art commerce, a gentle reminder of how even the sharpest trends can fade into soft echoes on a slowly turning digital breeze. No one asked for this. And yet, here we drift softly into the delicate world of microblog thread longform storytelling conventions from 2021. These are the subtle habits and structures that social media writers develop to weave extended narratives within the strict confines of platform character limits. But first, a slow little detour. For this extra interesting fact, that these narrative threads often employed a gentle layering of suspense and connection, with each short post carefully linked by hashtags, replies, or visual cues, creating a kind of digital loom where stories softly unfurled across time and space. As platforms evolved, with changing designs and interaction features, these storytelling patterns gently shifted, sometimes disappearing or morphing into new forms, much like the slow erosion of old trails beneath a dense mossy canopy. The intricate balance of brevity and continuity required for these threads echoes the soft rhythm of slowly turning gears, each post a small cog fitting perfectly into the greater machine of communal storytelling, now whispering quietly in the archive of online expression. Let us float gently onward into the brief, flickering light of early electric scooter customization decorative practices from 2022, a microcraft born of urban streets and transient fleets. No one asked for this. And yet, here we observe the ephemeral layering of stickers, small LED assemblies, and subtle paint details lovingly applied to shared scooters, turning utilitarian machines into fleeting canvases of personal expression. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that as fleets standardized and corporate branding tightened, these delicate adornments often vanished, swept away like feathers caught in an autumn breeze. The tactile joy of crafting in public spaces, touching smooth metal frames and arranging tiny lights, now drifts softly in memory, a quiet echo of a moment when urban microcraft briefly flourished beneath the hum of passing tires. Now, we drift into the small run zine folding and microprint binding variants that blossomed during the 2022 pandemic, a gentle turning inward of DIY communities. No one asked for this. And yet, here we find handmade works created with patience and ingenuity, using folding tricks and binding hacks born from necessity as commercial print shops closed their doors. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that some of these pandemic-specific techniques, involving creative uses of limited tools and materials, quietly disappeared as normalcy returned, preserved only in the soft folds of a few treasured booklets. The act of cutting, folding, and binding becomes a tactile meditation, reminiscent of slow moss growing over forgotten stones, a quiet creative pulse beating softly in uncertain times. Let us float gently onward into the 2023 short lifespan mobile or sticker pack aesthetics, tied closely to fleeting social platforms. No one asked for this. And yet, here we find visual sticker pack carpentries, carefully crafted sets of digital stickers that once adorned messages and stories but now often lie unused and inaccessible as platforms change or close their virtual doors. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that these visual packs frequently followed tight platform specifications, with size, frame rate, and animation limits shaping their subtle design choices, turning the crafting process into a quiet dance of constraints and creativity. Like feathers drifting from a nest, these digital decorations softly scatter, ephemeral markers of social moments now gently fading from collective memory. Now, we gently glide into ambient generative music patch recipes from 2023, where sound artists used platform-specific older plugins to create evolving soundscapes. No one asked for this. And yet, here we listen to carefully designed patch chains, modular synth configurations, and algorithmic controls that shaped ambient textures uniquely tied to now deprecated plugins and software versions. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that many of these sonic idioms, relying on quirks and behaviors of particular tools, are difficult to perfectly reproduce today, like trying to retrace the faint trails of smoke curling lazily through a quiet forest glen. The gentle hum of these patches remains a whispered legacy, an auditory moss slowly growing on the walls of digital sound history. Let us float gently onward into the quietly complex world of obsolete microcontroller art installation wiring conventions from 2024. No one asked for this. And yet, here we explore the subtle wiring methods and idiosyncratic hardware quirks of early microcontroller boards, lovingly assembled by makers into kinetic sculptures and interactive installations. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact that as hardware revisions occurred and new chips replaced older models, reconstructing these installations with exact fidelity became increasingly difficult, leaving soft trails of schematics and partially documented wiring gently fading like a slow-turning gear slipping out of alignment. The tactile memories of soldering irons, jumper wires, and code uploads linger like a quiet breath, a gentle pause in the ongoing dance of technology and creativity. No one asked for this. And yet here we find ourselves immersed in the fleeting and peculiar world of 2024's short-lived social video platform editing grammar. These editing templates and pacing conventions were delicately tailored to the ever-shifting whims of platform algorithms, creating a language of cuts, pauses, and visual beats uniquely matched to transient features. Consider the subtle choreography required to fit within time limits, the gentle nudge of trending sound cues, or the rhythmic slicing of video clips, each element carefully balanced to please an invisible algorithmic overseer that could change without warning. The artistry was not just in the content but in the very structure itself, a quiet dance with impermanence. As these platforms evolved or vanished, these editing grammars became soft echoes, much like the fading footprints of moss on damp stones, or the whisper of feathers drifting beyond reach. The creators, like slow architects of ephemeral structures, built momentary castles in the air, destined to dissolve with the tides of software updates and user migration. Now, drifting softly into the realm of experimental bioluminescent dye kits favored by bioart hobbyists in 2024, we encounter a delicate blend of biology and creativity. These limited-run kits offered unique cultivations of glowing organisms or synthetic mixes that shimmered faintly in the dark, capturing light as if it were moss absorbing the moon's gentle glow. The protocols for growing and mixing these bioluminescent dyes were fragile, tied to fleeting supplier batches and fragile living cultures, which have since quietly disappeared or been replaced by more stable, commercial alternatives. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: many of these dyes relied on carefully balanced nutrient media and precise light exposure cycles to coax their gentle luminescence, requiring patience and subtle hands. The ephemeral nature of these kits makes them a curious footnote in bioart history, like the brief flicker of a firefly caught between two sighing trees. In the softly humming spaces of streaming communities, ephemeral live stream interaction rituals of 2024 shimmered briefly before fading away. Audience participation techniques, such as real-time pole dances, reaction-triggered sound effects, or chat command activations, were uniquely bound to particular platform features that have since been removed or fundamentally altered. The choreography of streamer and audience became a tender ritual, a shared breathing space defined by fleeting digital tools. But first, a slow little detour. These interaction formats required precise timing and community understanding, where even a missed cue could gently disrupt the flow. As platforms restructured or vanished, these interactive dances became whispers of a time when digital performance was as delicate and transient as a feather drifting down through still air, barely touching the surface before slipping away. Among desktop fabrication makers, the 2024 obsolete 3D printing support structure finishing hacks form a quietly fascinating chapter. These techniques, crafted to address quirks in early resin formulations and slicer software bugs, involved patient sanding, chemical baths, or selective cutting to coax smoothness from prints stubbornly marked by their material and digital limitations. Let us wander momentarily through this extra interesting fact. Some resin blends had a tendency to cure unevenly, leaving tiny bumps or delicate ridges that required subtle, almost meditative finishing workflows to perfect. As resin chemistries and slicing software evolved, these artisanal hacks quietly fell into disuse, their knowledge becoming a soft, well-guarded secret among a dwindling circle of early adopters. The ritual of patiently coaxing perfection from imperfection remains a gentle reminder of hands meeting material in a slow, tactile embrace. Turning to the world of generative AI artists in 2024, short-run AI-generated video aesthetic prompt patterns, especially early prompt chains, carried an ephemeral beauty tied closely to specific model versions. These prompt chains, a sequence of carefully chosen text or image inputs designed to guide AI output, created distinct stylistic idioms that are now difficult to reproduce exactly due to rapid model updates and deprecations. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: Artists often discovered these aesthetics through hours of patient experimentation, discovering secret paths through prompt space that unlocked unique visual textures, color palettes, or compositional quirks, much like a sloth discovering the softest leaf in a vast forest canopy. As AI models evolved, these particular prompt recipes became like ancient recipes whispered only in forgotten corners of digital studios, softly fading into the gentle dusk of progress. Lastly, the early wave of wearable tech fashion hacks from 2024 invites us into a world where first-generation smart fabrics required bespoke design solutions to overcome their many quirks. These textiles, embedded with sensors or conductive threads, often presented challenges such as limited washability, stiff textures, or delicate circuitry prone to breakage. Designers devised ingenious fixes, reinforced seams, detachable electronics, or protective coatings, like moss clinging softly to uneven bark, adapting to an environment not yet fully tamed. But first, a slow little detour. Some smart fabrics even needed specialized stitching patterns to maintain signal integrity, turning the act of sewing into a quiet science of preservation and connection. As standards emerged and materials improved, these early hacks gently receded into the background, leaving behind only faint traces of creativity woven into the fabric of wearable tech history. Here we drift softly into the world of low-latency holographic stage cue practices from 2024, where experimental stage designers gently negotiated the delicate timing and rigging rituals required for early prototype holographic projection rigs. These setups demanded precise coordination, as even the slightest delay could disrupt the ephemeral illusion cast on stage, like the careful balancing of a feather floating just a moment too long before settling on mossy earth. The hardware, still in its tender infancy, required hands-on adjustments, manual syncing, and a kind of slow patience rarely seen in today's seamless digital environments. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Early rigging teams often developed a unique language of soft taps, whispered signals, and subtle lighting cues to orchestrate these ghostly projections, weaving a silent choreography that vanished as newer, more automated technologies arrived. The artistry was as much about anticipation and restraint as it was about spectacle, a dance with impermanence that echoed the quiet rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze. Wandering next into the intimate corners of local podcast communities in 2024, we find the gentle ritual of community micro-format audio podcasts, those daily 5 to 7 minute offerings that briefly bloomed like delicate wildflowers in a very narrow window of time. These tiny habitual episodes carved out small, comforting spaces for listeners, like a soft feather landing on a windowsill at dawn. Creators fashioned them as local morning greetings or evening wind downs, capturing whispers of neighborhood stories or the quiet hum of everyday life. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Many podcasters relied on remarkably consistent pacing and gentle tone shifts to create a predictable lullaby effect for their audience, an intentional simplicity that made these fleeting formats special. With evolving tastes and platform shifts, many such tiny podcasts quietly faded away, leaving behind a gentle echo of community presence, as subtle as moss reclaiming forgotten paths. Turning now to the fading world of obsolete game mod patch packaging conventions from 2024, we enter a realm where modding communities delicately crafted pack formats and loader hacks specifically for older game versions. These patch packages were complex nests of files and scripts, designed to bypass compatibility challenges posed by newer operating systems and evolving gaming platforms. The rituals surrounding their creation required patient debugging, careful file alignment, and sometimes reverse engineering of patch loaders, and intricate craftsmanship akin to weaving fine cords in near darkness. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact. Many modders would build their patch packages with carefully structured folder hierarchies and checksum validations to fool early game engines, a form of digital sleight of hand now made redundant by evolving platform support. As games and platforms modernized, these fragile patch formats became digital fossils, slowly buried under layers of update cycles and software obsolescence, like a quiet forest floor swallowing fallen leaves over time. Next, we find ourselves in the soft glow of ephemeral repro print handmade VHS transfer aesthetics, cherished by retro media artists who, in 2024, coaxed analog to analog transfers through increasingly rare VHS-C gear. These workflows, requiring obsolete machines and dwindling source tapes, involved carefully controlled recording speeds, tape head alignments, and gentle manual adjustments to preserve the grainy charm of analog video. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: the unique softness of VHS-C images was partly due to magnetic tape wear and the idiosyncratic quirks of camcorder transport mechanisms, producing a tactile warmth impossible to fully replicate digitally. As VHS-C decks and blank tapes vanished from common use, these lovingly crafted transfer processes became whispered secrets among a small band of media artisans, like a faint shimmer of moonlight on a still pond. Finally, the small-scale kintsugi analog resin recipes that emerged during the pandemic offer a tender glimpse into craft revivalists' inventive adaptations. Traditional kintsugi, the art of repairing broken ceramics with lacquer mixed with powdered gold, was gently reinterpreted using pandemic-era resin adhesives, unofficial substitutes developed when urushi lacquer was scarce. These resin adaptations required careful mixing ratios, curing times, and layering techniques to mimic the delicate translucence and tactile depth of the original art, albeit with a subtle glossiness unique to synthetic materials. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some crafters experimented with tinting these resins to approximate the warm hues of aged urushi, adding layers of intentional imperfection to preserve the spirit of wabi-sabi. Though these pandemic-inspired recipes are fading as traditional materials return, their memory lingers softly, like a mossy stone cradling the faint imprint of a long-gone footstep. No one asked for this. And yet, here we quietly enter the soft world of short-lived interactive Google Doc Play formats, those collaborative live script games that bloomed briefly within online improv communities in 2024. These playful experiments relied delicately on particular Google Docs features and user interface states that, with subsequent platform updates, shifted or disappeared entirely, leaving behind digital whispers of their existence. Participants navigated the gentle rhythm of shared typing, layer upon layer of scripted dialogue unfolding in real time, like the slow unfurling of a feather caught on a gentle breeze. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some game formats depended on cursor tracking visibility, a feature that allowed players to see one another's presence as soft moving shadows, creating a shared sense of presence and timing that vanished as updates streamlined the interface. These ephemeral play styles demanded patience and attentiveness, turning the virtual page into a delicate dance of improvisation that drifted away quietly as the platform evolved. In the misty realm of early VR salon performance choreographies, creators of immersive performance art wove movements intimately tied to platform-specific control bindings and input mappings from the dawn of virtual reality in 2024. These choreographies depended on the quirks of early VR controllers, where each button, trigger, and joystick possessed a unique digital vocabulary that no longer translates seamlessly on modern hardware. The art was as much about anticipating input delay and spatial drift as it was about gestures themselves, like tracing the slow, deliberate arcs of mossy vines curling up a weathered tree trunk. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: performers developed soft timing cues linked to early haptic feedback patterns, subtle vibrations that whispered responses to their movements and enriched the immersive narrative. As newer controllers introduced redesigned layouts and software abstractions, these early choreographies became ghosts of motion, preserved only in the memory of a few dedicated archivists and artists. Sound design devotees also linger in the quiet corners of niche analog synthesis preset hacking recipes, a realm where certain discontinued modules and firmware quirks were lovingly exploited to sculpt unique sonic textures no longer exactly reproducible. In 2024, these techniques required a deep understanding of aging hardware's idiosyncrasies, voltage inconsistencies, slight timing offsets, and the peculiarities of outdated chipsets that gave each patch a subtle personality, much like a slowly aging leaf turning golden in a quiet forest. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some synth hackers would deliberately push obsolete modules beyond recommended ranges, coaxing unpredictable oscillations and timbral shifts that imbued their soundscapes with a fragile vibrancy, akin to the fleeting glow of bioluminescent fungi on damp logs. As manufacturers ceased support and replacements failed to capture these nuances, these analog treasures settled into the soft shadows of music history. The quiet creativity of pandemic-era window display tableau techniques brought forth a tender DIY ritual in urban communities, crafting temporary scenes from household materials during periods of isolation in 2024. These ephemeral displays transformed empty storefronts and home windows into fleeting stages for hope in connection, constructed with paper, fabric scraps, and found objects arranged with delicate care and improvisation. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some crafters used subtle layering methods with translucent materials to catch shifting daylight, creating soft, glowing gradients reminiscent of fog filtering through ancient trees. As communities emerged from lockdown, these tableaus dissolved quietly, leaving behind memories of collective resilience wrapped in fragile, temporary beauty. Now we peek into the world of one-off collagist zine binding and interleaving tricks, where artist-specific methods crafted limited-run editions with inventive folds, stitchings, and layered page arrangements now lost to time. In 2024, these zine makers embrace tactile experimentation, twisting paper in unexpected ways, hiding secret pockets, and weaving threads that spoke softly beneath fingertips. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some artists employed variable density glue layering to create textural contrasts between pages, lending each spread a subtle interplay of stiffness and pliancy that enhanced the reading experience like a slow-moving tide. Since these tricks were rarely documented, surviving copies remain cherished relics of ephemeral artistic exploration, like moss clinging to a forgotten stone, quietly awaiting rediscovery. Here we softly arrive at the quiet world of micro-local indigenous language orthography art forms, where various indigenous communities in 2024 sought to revive written design practices for minority languages whose scripts had never fully stabilized. These delicate orthographies, often rich with unique calligraphic flourishes and regionally specific symbols, drifted gently between the worlds of language and art, like petals slowly falling through a forest clearing touched by dappled light. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some calligraphic forms included subtle brushstroke variations meant to mirror sounds and intonations not easily captured by more dominant writing systems, weaving layers of meaning both linguistic and visual. Unfortunately, many of these forms faded as standardization attempts struggled against historical disruption and lack of consistent usage, leaving behind fragments only glimpsed in fading manuscripts and oral histories. This liminal space between language preservation and artistic expression remains a quiet testament to cultural resilience, softly echoing like moss growing on ancient stones, waiting patiently for rediscovery. Moving onward, in the early months of 2025, generative artists explored short-lived experimental AI image upscaling aesthetic artifacts, peculiar visual quirks tied to specific model versions and training time idiosyncrasies that evaporated as newer algorithms refined and replaced them. These artifacts, sometimes manifesting as faint halos, unexpected texture shifts, or gently swirling pixel clusters, felt much like the slow dance of dust motes drifting in a sunbeam through a quiet room. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some artists deliberately embraced these transient glitches as a form of digital wabi-sabi, cherishing the imperfect, fleeting beauty of AI's early imperfections before they smoothed into polished consistency. As models evolved, these once celebrated anomalies quietly disappeared, leaving only the soft memory of their subtle visual poetry for those who looked closely enough. Lastly, we settle into the pixelated realm of ephemeral community server pixel art conventions from 2025, where small, tightly knit online guilds shared specific palette choices and layering techniques unique to their groups. These micro-communities, often centered on particular game servers or chat groups, developed visual vocabularies as distinctive as the mossy textures on ancient bark, each pixel carefully chosen to evoke a shared identity and mood. But first, a slow little detour for this extra interesting fact: some guilds employed palette cycling methods, shifting color sequences in pixel art animations to simulate gentle movement or mood changes without increasing file size, a clever, resourceful trick now less practiced as platforms migrated and expanded their capabilities. With the natural drift of communities to newer platforms or dissolutions, these specific conventions quietly slipped away, leaving behind pixelated shadows and archived screenshots and cherished memories. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.